Now let's discuss aging populations. We've briefly touched on this before, but now we're going to hyper-focus on it. So this picture that you see here was taken in Italy. Italy is an aging population. The average median age of a resident in Italy has been increasing. In aging populations, the age that we're really looking at is high 40s, right now low 50s. But obviously, as time goes on and those increase, we may look at mid 50s, late 50s, maybe even early 60s for some countries as the median age. So, aging populations. Population aging, where there's more elderly compared to the youth and young adults, is determined by birth and death rates, our crude birth rates, our crude death rates, as well as the life expectancy. Obviously, we would expect life expectancy to increase. Aging populations are synonymous often with negative population growth, total fertility rate below the replacement rate, so you cannot replace the population anymore, a negative natural increase rate, and a negative net immigration, which means more emigration. This doesn't automatically mean that the NIR is negative, because maybe we have a birth rate above or right at the death rate, but we see a lot of emigration. That's an aging population. So it's a really, really low NIR, oftentimes negative. If it is negative, we could conclude that it is an aging population for the most part. So the crude birth rate often declines below the crude death rate, which means we have less births and more deaths. So death, for D, is greater than our births. So there's more population going away than population coming in. So Italy, which is, the picture, the crude birth rate is 7.6 and the CDR is 10.7. They have a negative natural increase rate. As the population ages, the CDR, the crude death rate, tends to increase. This is what we see due to a higher proportion of elderly individuals who have higher mortality rates compared to younger age groups. Younger people are healthier, they have better hip bones. So they're going to die at fewer rates than elderly populations. In countries where there's a lot more youth than elderly, we see typically higher infant mortality rates, but in these developed countries, the younger people typically are surviving at higher rates and making it to at least middle adulthood and then to the elderly, because they have so much access to healthcare and food, and they have knowledge in how to live and not to smoke and that sort of thing. Oftentimes they are delaying marriage and pregnancy so they can delay or even avoid the possible consequences that come from that. So people who are dying in these countries are typically the elderly. Remember that the DTM stage 5 said that we would see a CDR increase. And if you think about the ETM now, the causes of death are delayed and degenerative diseases, like cardiovascular disease and obesity and cancer, which are very prominent in elderly individuals. And we also see the resurgence of infectious diseases as well. Improvements in healthcare, nutrition, sanitation, and overall quality of life has significantly increased life expectancy around the world. People are living longer and healthier lives. So when you have an increased life expectancy, you have a higher proportion of elderly individual. So the countries are made up of more old people, contributing to an overall aging of the population. So this map here is a pretty high quality map, guys. I promise. There's no legend or anything. But you can assume that the darker shaded countries, the red countries, are the more aging populations. Our aging countries are typically located in Europe, especially Eastern Europe. And then Japan's not on the map, but we can just write here Japan. Japan is also a major aging population. This little part right here is a part of France, so don't worry about that. But they're obviously in our more developed countries. These are our countries in stage 5 of the demographic transition model. Countries in stage 4, like Russia, Canada, United States, Australia is kind of down here in the corner. These countries are getting there, but they're not quite there yet. This is where the population is at replacement rate, or maybe just a little bit below, like the United States is below replacement rate. And then our very, very less developed countries, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa or even the Middle East, are not going to be aging at all because they have very high population growth rates. So they're going to have a very high youth population. They also have lower life expectancies, so there's very low quantity of individuals in the elderly age groups as well. So they actually asked about this on an FRQ about 11 years ago, and we're going to look through this. So identify and explain 2 reasons that the average population age is increasing in developed countries. And of course, I do need to point out that aging populations really only occur in developed countries. Now, why? Out of migration of youth. The youth are leaving. We're seeing a lot of emigration of the youth compared to the elderly. So they're leaving. Why? For better lifestyles. Maybe there's access to jobs and career opportunities that they don't have in their home countries. Maybe for better security. Maybe they're leaving countries that will persecute them or are different than them. And then there's also education purposes as well that I didn't include here. What about reduced fertility rates? Improved education on women, more women working, and as well as delays in starting families are all correlated with lower fertility rates. Children are seen as an economic liability over a necessity in MDCs. They're typically more expensive to have, and there's also societal norms that having 1 to 2 children is acceptable, and it's very common in America. It's very common for only childs to exist or to have maybe 1 sibling, 2 siblings. It's not as prominent to have 4 or 5 siblings. In fact, I know people who have a lot of siblings, and it's kind of a funny trait of theirs. Like, yeah, I have 7 siblings. It's just not the norm. Birth control is also more available, it's more cost effective, it's more accepted, and it's of a higher quality in developed countries as well. More urban societies reduce the need for children to work on farms. This also contributes to the too expensive part because urban cities are expensive to live in. And there's also government and private pensions reducing children as pension. That's not something I would expect you to write on the AP exam. Any of these things, actually, because these are the ones we've talked about so much. But this one's it also does exist, and that's why they include it. Now, the FRQ also gave a chart, and this chart didn't really help you answer the question here, but it kind of gives you a broad look here at some aging countries like Belgium, Denmark, Japan, Russia, Ukraine, and the United Kingdom. So we can see here at the year 2000, the population aged 65 and older were all below 20%, but they predict with current population trends that by 2050, 50 years later, that they are going to increase a good bit to at least 24% of the population. It is high as 32% of the population in Japan. So we can see here in like Russia, in this 50-year period, they expect that the proportion, not numbers, but the percentage of the population age being elderly is going to double, which is a ton. So yeah, pretty interesting here. Let's continue this though. Increased life expectancy. This is a big one. This is probably one I would have talked about, is the increased life expectancy, because we see increased health care, so we can prescribe penicillin. That's what I was going to say. That was too much effort. I'm never doing that again. We also have access to more specialized facilities, even rural facilities. That's a big one as well. We have research and knowledge on healthcare and washing your hands and germ theory. We have more medical personnel. They're more trained personnel. They're not doing lobotomies anymore. We have better technologies like CT scans and just more accessibility in general. Improved lifestyles with better diets, knowledge on health risks, technology like fridges, nutrition, and an emphasis on exercising. We see improved food security and availability, less conflict, like less crime, and fewer wars. And that's not something a lot of people think about, but in more developed countries, we typically see less war, where you have all the men in the country on the front lines. We see improved work conditions with better labor laws and better safety standards, and the labor is typically less physically demanding. And we can look at this as developed countries typically are more focused in the service-based sector. Look at Italy. Tourism drives the Italian economy compared to countries in like Southern Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, where agriculture is a big driving factor of the economy. Even in countries that are going through big manufacturing stages, like China is a very prominent manufacturing hub, the working conditions are not that great and often lead to a lot of accidents and even deaths. We see improved public health, like with sanitation, hand sanitizer, water supply, housing, an increased standard of living, improved financial security for the elderly, like pensions and care facilities. They don't have to worry about how they're going to get food on the table for themselves. We see improved safety standards for sports, transportations, and building codes as well. So here is Croatia. This is a population pyramid. I like this population pyramid because we can actually see any skewed sex ratio. So this is a female surplus here, and we obviously know that females typically live longer than men. We can see that here. But they do have a very high life expectancy. We have a good proportion of the population living above the age of 65, which is about right here. They are definitely an aging population. We see it the life expectancy, and because overall the population growth has declined, particularly within the last 40 years or so. So they are definitely an aging population, and they're located in Eastern Europe, which is where we see a lot of other aging populations to occur. So what are the consequences of aging populations? Well, let's look at these. We're going to do some ESPN here. So what are the political consequences? Well, we see an increased demand for healthcare services for the elderly, particularly with increased government investment and emphasis on the healthcare system. They're not going to focus on education as much. They may divert money away from education. They may close schools because we have a lower percentage of youth and children in the country, and we have a lot more elderly to take care of and focus on. That's more votes that they want to earn. We see more retirees and fewer workers. So pension systems may become unsustainable. Governments may not be able to afford them because they have lower tax bases now. Governments may raise the retirement age now so less people can access these pension systems. They may adjust benefit levels. They may lower the benefits to be able to afford them, or they'll increase pension contributions. So people who are working may have to pay more in Social Security taxes. Pension and Social Security systems will become policy focuses as well. There may be a greater push on immigration to bring in people to the country. They want to increase the population, bring in work to stimulate the economy. They may want to bring in guest workers, very educated or skilled individuals as well. They may see fewer military recruits as well. Old people can't serve in the military. We see older individuals tend to vote in higher numbers compared to younger people, which can influence political priorities and election outcomes. The elderly will become the majority. We also may see pro-natalist policies to increase the crude birth rate. What about the social consequences? Well, we see overall smaller family sizes, more only childs. Societal attitudes towards aging and the elderly may evolve. We may see more bingo hours when we just travel down the road. Those little signs like bingo hour tonight. We see greater inclusion and greater respect for elderly individuals. According to the World Health Organization, the number of people aged 65 or older will double from the year 2010 to 2050. Only a 40-year period, which with age comes the potential for certain conditions to become more prevalent. These conditions are prevalent in aged individuals like cancer, dementia, obesity, depression, and just falling in general. Families may feel increased pressure to provide care for elderly relatives. Italy has the highest percentage of elderly adults living with their parents in the EU. Increased immigration results in increased diversity and culture if their immigration policies work. Perhaps social conflicts, though, as well. We may see more tensions and the growth of ethnic neighborhoods as well. We may see changes to building codes and signage, like larger fonts and audio messages. We see the closure of schools and the reduction of daycares, as well as homogenous senior neighborhoods with smaller homes or people living in more condos. You don't need as much house when you're old. You're not raising a family anymore. They want to live in somewhere where there's a lot less maintenance as well, a lot less handiwork that they need to do. And there's going to be an increased availability of homes for the youth. What about the economic consequences? Well, we could see increased costs to society due to government programs and taxes like medical care, housing, accessibility, and pensions. People are going to have to pay taxes more to support these facilities and services. Increased economic pressure on the labor force. We see a high dependency ratio, which challenges a sustainable economy with fewer people working and fewer people paying taxes. How are they going to grow the economy when there's less people working and more open jobs? We can see a shortage of labor, or people may start hiring the elderly. There's going to be less competition among the youth for jobs. There's going to be a greater need for immigration and automation as well, because that's going to decrease the need for labor. We're going to see a growth of course, senior-based employment and a decline of youth-based employment. We're going to see an economic pressure on adult children, oftentimes to financially assist their aging parents who may not be able to work, or their pensions or Social Security may not cover all of their basic expenses. They may have to stay at home rather than work. They may just move in with their parents. They may have to help pay for others to assist. They have to help pay for nursing homes, help pay for medical costs. Those are expensive expenses. Businesses may need to adapt to the changing needs and preferences of older consumer base. So they're going to have to advertise to older people. They're going to have to sell goods and services tailored to the elderly and so what they need, because they're going to become a major part of their profit and just overall business. They got to cater to the customers. So Japan. You're getting old. Japan is the notorious example of an aging population. In AP Human Geography, you're going to hear about Japan being an aging population a lot. They have the highest percentage of elderly citizens in the world, 29% of the population aged 65 and older in 2022. So this is an excerpt from an article I read. So we're just going to read it and then I'll explain it. So Japan's GDP is bound to decline. This is their size of the economy. So their size of the economy is going to decline with a decline in a working age population, unless there's an increase in productivity. And we can see that with automation or increased immigration, people coming into the country. Now, this decline can be slowed by extending the retirement age. So people have to work longer to reach retirement age. So you're going to increase the number of older workers, and it would also, they said, also increase female participation. And that kind of goes back to men die at an earlier age than women. So if you increase the retirement age, you're probably going to have a higher percentage of women than men in the population. So you're going to increase female participation in the workforce. But they said here that these strategies will only decline it. It won't fix the problem with a declining working age population. Another excerpt from that article: labor shortages have already begun. That's a very significant thing in various sectors and progression. We see an increasing number of small and medium-sized enterprises have closed, so businesses are shutting down because of a lack of successors. Professions that provide social and public services like teachers, doctors, and caregivers are facing labor shortages. These are very specialized fields. The negative economic impacts of depopulation are already being felt acutely in rural areas where population growth is obviously lower. The negative economic impacts of an aging population will be inevitably caused by Japan's living standard to decline. It will cause Japan's living standard to decline. So they already have a standard of living that's pretty high, but they expect for it to decrease now. It's kind of like a little quadratic. Woo! Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. It really does help me out, and it costs $0. I have some free resources for you in the description down below if you'd like to use them. If you have any AP Human Geography related questions whatsoever, don't hesitate to leave a comment down below the video or send me a message on Discord. I'll see you guys in the next video, though. Adios.